Art is a very lonely business. It really, really is. Art shouldn't just take place in your basement or in your studio. It should be a part of everything that you do. It's a lifestyle and not just a part of your life. If you're really going to sort of dive into it, it has to be a part of everything that you do. So I'm always trying to look for different avenues of doing art.
Are we live? Hello, and welcome to the first episode of The Face of Art. I've partnered with our local TV station, NCTV, to bring you this programming. Our mission is to shine a light on local artists through these live one-on-one conversations. Each week, we'll feature a different artist and discuss their passions, their journeys to becoming an artist, and their challenges and victories. The artist will feature will not only be from Nantucket, but also from Nosara, Costa Rica. I spend 4 months a year there. It's become a second home. And like Nantucket, it's an amazing community, rich with beautiful and talented artists. Towards the end of our conversation today, we'll take some questions from you guys through our chat window, which is to your right on your screen. All right, are you ready? Got your wine? Got your tea? Today's guest is Matthew Oates. Matt has lived on Nantucket since 1991. His creative journey began on Christmas Day in 2008, which we'll talk about. Matt is a member of the Artists Association of Nantucket. He teaches at NISDA, which is our Nantucket Island School of Design and Art. His artistic genre is public art, or as he likes to call it, pay attention art. Because it's public art, you don't have to visit a gallery to see it. His creations are live in our public spaces around the island. All right, let's bring Maddie in. Hello, Matt.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How you doing today?
Good. Very nice.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, you got it. You got it. So Maddie, I showed, you didn't see it, but I showed some clips from our film that we did together in 2014. And I wanted to ask you a couple questions from that. I figured that would be a good lead-in since our viewers just saw that. The first question I had is, you in the film, you said the greatest gift you can give someone is to ask them a question that only they can answer. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Well, it seems to me that there's only one question. You can always get help when you have a question, whatever that question is. But there's one question that you have to sort of figure out yourself, and that's, who am I? When you support people and help them to get to that point where they sit down and they ask that question of themselves, it just seems like they're going to find out things that are going to be really important to them. But they're the only ones that can answer that question. Nobody else can answer that question for you.
Right. All right. Well, here's my gift to you. Did you find art, or did art find you?
Boy.
I stumped you already.
That's a tough question, because
let me help you out a little bit. Let's talk about Christmas Day in 2008. In the film, you talked about getting the shit kicked out of you on Christmas Eve. I'm curious what led up to that shit kicking, and how did it ultimately, shape your creative life? I'm guessing that's part of you finding art, or art finding you.
It's everything. It's literally everything.
All right, so tell us about what happened.
I never thought of doing art ever. Like, it just never really occurred to me. I worked in my garden over in Hummock Pond, and I went to work, and I paid my mortgage, and it just, I lived in a picture of my life, but that picture was in my head, and I didn't really realize that when you do that, it isn't necessarily true, because it's something that you made up in your head. And then having that moment where basically sadistic brutality used as entertainment didn't fit into that picture. And I realized that that was what had happened to me. So when I was sitting there Christmas morning and I had lost that picture, I no longer had the picture in my head of where I was living and how I was living and what I was doing. And my brain immediately went to making things. I mean, that wasn't the only thing I did. Everybody in the world's got 300 bad poems in them, and I wrote every single one of them. I mean, I tried everything, making up stories. I tried painting, and what I do now is the thing that's stuck. But the interesting thing about that is when I walked down into my basement, it was filled with broken stuff. Like I already had everything that I needed to start doing art. It was like I had been collecting it unconsciously for years. I had broken vacuum cleaners and tools and stereo equipment. I had bins of broken toys. And I cannot tell you why I had all that stuff. I had just collected it for years and years. So when I went downstairs, all I needed was glue. Like I was ready to go.
And you jumped over Christmas Eve. Is there anything you can tell us about this? What happened?
I went to.
I mean, don't name names, but like, what led up to you getting the shit kicked out of you?
Well, that wasn't really the devastating part.
Okay, all right. I mean, if the story lies in Christmas morning, we can stick with that.
I went to see a friend of mine who was bartending. At the time, I was struggling to pay my mortgage. I was doing it, but it was difficult, and I really wasn't going out, and I really wasn't doing anything. But it was Christmas Eve, and I'm like, I have a friend, a woman I've known on the island for 100 years, and I was going to go and have a beer and wish her Merry Christmas. And I walked in the door, and unfortunately, she wasn't working, and I decided I was going to, have a beer anyway. I was out, and then go home. And from what I understand, I was sort of zeroed. There was a Christmas party going on in the corner, and I guess it must have been boring because these guys just came over and beat me up. I mean, they literally to the point of unconscious.
Oh
and from what I understand, because I don't, which is another interesting aspect of this, is the people who were there, told me later on that their girlfriends came over and kicked me in the head. I mean, it was just like brutal. And that was not something that I really pictured where I live. That wasn't in the picture. It was like losing an illusion, and you have to go someplace else. And art just seemed to be the natural place to go.
Okay. You also said in the film that you were uncomfortable being called an artist. It's now 6 years later since we made the film. Has that changed?
Not really, no. Too many people use the word as a word of separation. They say, you're an artist, like you're different than I am. And I think it's the thing that makes me the same as everybody else, because everybody got this in them. Everybody does. I don't care who you are, somewhere deep down, if I can wake up one day and start doing this, anybody can. Like you can, you have this in you already. The whole idea, I think, is you pour out onto the table everything that you are, and then you pull the box over, and you take everything that goes in the box and you put it in the box because that's where it goes. Then you push it aside. There's going to be stuff left on that table, and that's who you are, and you got to find a place to put that. And the only way you're going to do that is through some creative act, because it doesn't fit in the box. What are you going to do with it? You're not going to, I don't personally think that you can ever really be happy until you can find places to put those things, because that's who you are.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the objects that you work with. You call them unwanted and unloved. Can you explain what you mean by that?
It's about Second Life design, I think. I mean, I've always had a very almost borderline fanatical attitude about recycling. And I think that's another reason that stuff was in my basement. I just didn't want to throw it away. Like someday I'm going to fix this tool. It just seems like when you go to the take it or leave it and you look at the stuff on the table, all that stuff was loved by somebody at some point. Someone went out and bought that. They didn't find it. They spent money on it, and it sat on their shelf for some period of time. And then they decided they didn't want it anymore, like some toy that you grew up with and then you forget about. and then you find it years later and you say, oh, wow, look at that. It's that toy, and it seems like all that stuff on that table was once loved, and then it somehow lost whatever its value was to the person who spent money on it. I mean, they spent money, they bought it, so it had to have some value at some point, and then it seems to have lost that. So I just kind of want to give it a value again by making it into something else. Sure.
Can you explain the take it or leave it for people off island that might not know what that is?
The take it or leave it is the perfect example of coming upon a treasure chest half buried in the sand, and you have no idea what's going to be in that treasure chest, and you open it up, because every time you go to the take it or leave it, you never know what you're going to find. Some days there's nothing. Other days there's mountains of stuff. It's almost like the randomness of it gives you a choice that you don't normally have in your regular life, where you plan everything out and you think of things in terms of, this is what I'm going to do then. I'm very surprised when I talk to people from off island that every place doesn't have a take it or leave it. It seems like every place should have one of those. If you don't want something, you put it there and someone else can use it. I try to avoid things that work, because that's not what I work in. I work in broken things, but there's a lot of good stuff there that people can actually use, and it shouldn't be wasted. My parents used to say, my parents grew up in the Depression, and they never threw anything away. I mean, they fixed everything. My mother had a jar of buttons from old shirts that she would save. And if you lost a button, she would sew that on there. And I remember growing up with mismatched buttons on things. That attitude really made a deep impression upon me. And I just always had it. When I did bird stuff for a long time, and all of that was made out of recycled wood, from dumpsters.
Now, it must be a little more difficult today to find these materials, because there's no building going on. The take it or leave it is shut. What are you doing to find objects now?
It's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's sort of like, you're right. Fortunately, I have a good collection, a pile over here of busted up stuff. And
is that what that is behind you?
Random things, so, but at the same time, you're right. I miss the introduction of new materials, because that does spawn something new to make. But at the same time, it's, okay, this is what I have. What can I make out of this? And it's sort of like having only 4 crayons to color something. Those are the crayons you got. And if you want to color it, those are the colors it's going to come out as. What can I do with these 4 crayons? Cool.
I'm going to screen share, Maddie, and so we can talk about. Can you see what I'm showing now?
Yes.
So these are some of your creations. I'm just wondering. We know where and how you get your materials, but where's the inspiration for creating these characters? Where does that come from?
I wish I could tell you. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
so when you first set out, were you creating creatures? Things with 2 eyes and feet and legs?
Yes, I definitely lean in that direction. Something that is, I like the idea that I would want people to be happy when they see what I do. I just have that sort of attitude that you're running to work with your coffee and you're a little late, and you're going down Main Street or whatever, and you look in a window box, and there's something there that's bright and colorful, and if you smile, that's all it's got to be. That's enough for me. I don't really know. It doesn't have to be anything more than that for me. I mean, that's the idea of paying attention, is sort of helping people to pay attention to what's around them, and which, I think was something that on Christmas, the gift I got Christmas morning was, all of a sudden I had to pay attention and stop staring at the picture. And it's why I'm where I am now, which is kind of crazy happy. So
I found this character in town the other day. How long has this been out there? The guy with the mask?
About 2 weeks. It was an old television show and that I vaguely remember seeing when I was really young, and it was called Romper Room. And at the end of the show, the teacher would get the magic mirror and she would hold it up and she would say, "Hi, Bobby. Hi, Billy. Hi, Jane. Happy birthday, Peter." And I distinctly remember, I had to be like in diapers, but I remember always waiting for my name to be called. Like I was, why doesn't she see me in the magic mirror? I'm right here. So that's, I think her name was Miss Grace, and it seemed to fit. With all that's going on, I think it's kind of important that people wear masks. So I thought I would do something fun to sort of promote.
Yeah, it's a nice, simple, fun way to get the message out. I thought it was great when I drove by.
It's certainly geared to people of a particular generation, and I've run into problems where some of my cultural references, younger people don't really get.
And then there's this sign tacked to the outside of your gallery, which I loved as well. I thought that was a great message. If you want to talk about it, or we can just show it to people.
I'll tell you, I'm always very interested in the questions that I don't hear. I don't have television. I don't watch television. I watch movies on my little movie thing. I like old movies. And I like old radio shows, but I listen to the radio. That's where I get most of my information. Like I was saying before, like, what is Facebook? Like, I have no idea what that is. And
so I just
want the audio nature of it.
Say again?
I like the audio nature of radio.
Yeah.
You there's something about audio that I really kind of like, but I kept hearing everybody talking about how they wanted everything to get back to normal. And I kept thinking about it. I'm like, I really, going back just never seems like a good idea to me. Why don't we go forward, like make it better? Like, why go back to something when the opportunity is to have it better? And I never heard anybody asking that question. It just, I don't know, questions I don't hear, they stick in my brain.
I'm going to bring up a couple more images here. Oops, not that one. Sorry.
Hey, those guys, they work hard, baby.
Yeah, that was a shout out to the UPS drivers.
They do. They work hard.
Let's talk about your car. Now, this is not the car I would have chosen for you. But tell me how you came to own this car, or any other stories behind it.
It was a gift. It was gifted to me. A young lady that lived at the Nizza Cottage who is an editor. Her father owned it, and her father gave it to her. And I don't really think a 94 Cadillac suited her particular idea of what she wanted to drive around in. And I had been from being sick. I had voluntarily given up my driver's license because I couldn't drive anymore. And then when I got better and I went to get it back, the state of Massachusetts, I'll tell you what, they would not give me a driver's license. I had to fight with them for 2 years to get my driver's license back. And when I finally got it back, she gave me the car under the premise that I would paint it and drive it around for the summer. She was like, "You got to do that." And I said to her, if I had to buy this car, I would paint it and drive it around for the summer, because everything looks better with a little paint on it. A little color, nicely done, hopefully.
So this medical condition you had, this had something to do with your eyesight, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I remember that being a pretty scary time for you.
I went through a series of illnesses. I really did. And I was very, very fortunate, extremely fortunate. The only thing I really, not being able to see is a very difficult place to live. And it would be very difficult to explain to people. The world gets really small, and you start to live in your head because it's all you have. So you play these videotapes of your memories over and over and over again, trying to fill the space of what you can't see anymore, and until the videotapes break, and then you end up going someplace else. And it's just real. Yeah, it's weird. It's I don't know, you're trying to fill a space that you spent your whole life having, And
what percentage of your sight did you lose? Like what was the worst? What was the worst point?
It took about a month from when I started to notice. I wore glasses my whole life, and I thought I just needed new glasses at first, and then it started to get worse and worse and worse, and so I went to the eye doctor, and Rubio was really nice, but he basically said to me, "You're not going to see anymore," and I was just like, "What?
Oh man,
really? Like really?" And it wasn't long after that the world doesn't go dark; it went white. It just, everything was white. Now, the thing about this is, and I actually, not really a letter writer, but I sat down after all of this and wrote a letter. It took a year. I literally couldn't see for a year. I got my first operation July 21st of the next year, and it was around July, I started not being able to see the previous year. And all these, I had to go in and they looking at it, trying to figure out what's wrong and how they're going to fix it. And obviously they did a great job, but not once did anyone tell me that I wasn't going to go back to seeing the way I used to, which I didn't. I see differently now. And then I had that whole problem of trying to match up the pictures in your head of what things look like. But then afterwards, they looked a little different. And I can't tell you how they looked different, but they were different. Everything was sort of different somehow. But when they fixed, if they're going to go all trouble of fixing your eyes, they do a really, really good job. So my eyesight is way better than it was before, like crazy better. I could see that little flag they left up on the moon. I mean, which is another like issue of like, really? That's right. To this day, I still like find myself staring at things. All of a sudden I'll realize I'm staring at something because I can see the details that I never saw before. It's very strange.
I bet.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, I'm going to go back to our slideshow here. Talk about your gallery space. I visited, I drove by the other day to take these shots. Can you tell me so this building here is probably 75 yards from the water?
Yeah.
It's got ocean views. It's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Who owns the building?
Sunrise is right there. Like you walk out with your cup of coffee and there's the sunrise.
So you got that. Who owns the building and how did you end up there?
It's part of the NISDA Schools Artists in Residence, where they bring people in to stay in the cottages and write or paint. They come to Nantucket and do an artist in residence thing, and I sort of watch over the property. So they gave me this. Basically, I refer to it as my little shed by the sea because that's kind of what it is. It's sort of a shed that I made into a living space. Everything I make on this table right here. This is my workspace right here. So anything you see comes from right here. Maybe a step back if it's like Miss Grace. Sorry, but the thing I like about it is the building's been sinking since the 30s.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned the flood zone.
Yes, we get flooded. I've been flooded out of here, like literally flooded, like on the roof, having a beer, waiting for the Coast Guard, which literally didn't happen. But that's just the price you pay for living. I live in town on the water. Like people, it's a pretty good situation. But the building didn't sink. Every time it floods, it doesn't sink evenly. It sinks like crookedly. So everything in the building is crooked. There isn't a straight line in this whole place. And there's something about being surrounded by everything being off kilter that at the moment I think is really good for what I do. I mean, I don't necessarily, I would like to have a bigger space to work. I have to admit. But right now, it's working out well. It's a good space.
So it wasn't a living space when you moved in, it was a shed.
Yeah, well, it had been a living space a long time ago, and then it was a storage shed.
So was there electric and water?
Yeah. But the floor was kind of gone. This is how things run for me. And this is why I tell people, like, I'm the luckiest person you're ever going to meet in your life. Because when I came here and they were like, there was no door on it. You know, I mean, like birds were flying in and out looking for bugs. And they said, you know, you can have this space if you want it. And across the street and behind right the house next door, both of them were being demoed by contractors that I knew. So I went over and I said, hey, you think I can get some of this stuff to fix up the place? And they were both like, go ahead, take whatever you want. And I was like, really? How did this work? This is like perfect timing. So, you know, I was able to get it's all recycled because it's all out of 2 buildings that were being demoed, basically. But if at that time I didn't have a driver's license, so to get the materials would have been very difficult. But instead, they were right next door. It was like, you got to be kidding me.
I'm going to screen share again. One of the things you're probably most recognized for was something that you'd set up several years ago called the 5-cent advice stand outside of your house. Can you tell us a couple good stories about people that visited the advice stand or came to you for advice? Is there any stories that really stand out?
You could, it's a perfect example of you get an idea. I was Charlie Brown Christmas. Of course, it was July, and I was watching Charlie Brown Christmas down in my basement workroom, because I've always watched movies. And I looked up, and Lucy had she was shaking the can and with the stand that said psychiatric help, 5 cents. And I was like, I'm doing that. I'm going to do that. You know, because art is a pretty lonely business. You don't really necessarily get to interact with the public very much. You spend a lot of time by yourself. So I was looking for ways to sort of expand on that a little bit. So I was like, I'm going to do that. And maybe 20 people will stop and, you know, it'll be interesting conversation. Well, a lawyer friend of mine said, if you give out psychiatric help, I mean, I was going to get a couch and put it in the driveway and, you know, and like, tell me about your dreams. Like, and, you know, people that stop, like, you got it, you know, can't imagine how much fun that would have been. But you can't really give out medical advice without a license. You go to prison. So I kept thinking about it. And I was like, anybody can give out advice. So that, you know, it really turned into something. And you never know where something is going to go until you try it. Till you get out there and you make the hand painted sign and you sit down in the chair with your cup of coffee and see where it goes. And it became this, like, really, I mean, I had such a great time. The best examples of I had a spiel. People would walk up to the table and I would say, don't tell me your name. I don't want it. I don't want to know your name. I don't know where you're from. This is an opportunity for you to ask a question to someone who you know is going to tell you exactly what they think, because they're not your brother or your cousin or your aunt. This is somebody you're never going to see again. It is an opportunity. And I could see people's faces change, where I think maybe they were going to say, where should I go to dinner? It became something else, because I think deep down inside, everybody has a question they've always wanted to ask. It's one of the things that makes us all the same, is we just have a question that we would just love to ask someone and get a straight answer to.
So did you keep a diary of these experiences with these people?
What I should have done was because I didn't get anybody's name, I should have had audio. I should have just recorded it audio. But like I said, I had no idea. I mean, several times the police showed up because there were so many cars on the side of the road.
Did they show up for advice or to give you a hard time?
They could find out what was going on. I looked at one officer and he says, what's going on here? There's all these kids in the driveway waiting their turn. People were bringing their little children. And I said, well, I'm giving out advice for 5 cents. And he looked at the sign on the table and then he looked at me and he didn't say a word, got back in the car, drove away. I think because, like, how do you write that up? Like, where's the paperwork go on that one? You know? But as much as I hate, I found out something, and it's purely anecdotal. You're culling from the environment people who are fun. Pissed off, unhappy people do not stop and talk to a crazy guy on the side of the road. So you're attracting people that are already open to having some kind of fun. But literally, a guy, I talked to this young couple, and the guy had just graduated from college, and this is when it dawned on me what the project was really about. Because up to that point, I didn't know. He was just having fun. And he said, I'm thinking about going to graduate school to become a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. And then he paused for a minute and he said, but I've always really been interested in kites. And I was like, obviously the guy wants to build kites, because you don't put kites in with those other things. Like, you don't, so I never really gave out advice. I never gave anybody advice. I just think sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we all as human beings need someone standing there saying, you know what? If you want to glue toothpicks to tennis balls, you're not hurting yourself. You're not hurting anybody else. Here's some glue. Go ahead. We just kind of need those moments, because I don't really think people should have to justify who they are. And so it makes me uncomfortable. But I can't deny the evidence that sometimes people just need a little support and encouragement. They need someone to say, you know what? If you don't want to be a doctor or I had a guy who was a doctor, an older guy, and he was like, I want to try new things, and I want to, and I was like, you're not going to forget being a doctor. So if you try something else for a year, you can always go back to it. That should encourage you to do something new, not be a handicap, because you can always go back to it. It doesn't go away because you decide to make shoes or something, but we all kind of need that. We need someone standing there saying sometimes, because I'm still very uncomfortable about it. We just kind of need that. I'll tell you
Would you go back to doing the advice stand?
Yeah. If I had to
bring that back, I would approach it a little differently and record or whatever you needed to do. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I was talking to these people, and this car kept driving back and forth, and it was a young guy in it, and it's one of the few times I actually gave out advice to somebody.
This is the story I'm looking for. I can feel it.
Yeah, okay. And so he's obviously waiting for the 3 or 4 people to leave. And they do, and he pulls over, and he gets out of the car, and he's early 20s. And I give him the spiel, which I found out later I didn't have to. And he's got his nickel in his hand, and he's sweating and shaking, like literally shaking. And I'm like, what is this about? This is supposed to be a fun thing. It's not supposed to be, the nature of advice is choosing from a series of choices, not really answering a question. No one can answer, what should I do with the rest of my life? Nobody can say that. But if you give them a series of choices, one of those is the one they want to do. So he looks me right in the eye and he says, I'm thinking about asking my girlfriend to marry me, and I'm not sure what I should do.
Wow.
Dude, I can't tell you.
Come to Maddie Oates. Maddie Oates has got the answer.
Yeah, tell you to get married or not.
Wow.
So we end up having this great conversation, and I can tell he's really serious about it. He's like, it's a big move and it's important, and I don't want to change, it's going to be a life changer. I don't have a good job yet, I sort of realized that he wasn't looking for advice. He was looking for someone to talk to that he knew he wasn't going to judge him. If he had talked to his friends about it, then they would know he was thinking about it, or his parents or his sister or brother or whatever. He just wanted to get it out and then see where it would go. So then I relaxed. I was like, okay, he's not looking for me to do anything here. So he goes to leave, and he's halfway across the street. And I said, hey, I'm going to give you some advice. This is my advice. Do not go home and tell your girlfriend that you stopped to talk to some crazy guy on the side of the road about getting married, because she's going to hit you with something. Wait till the birth of your 4th grandchild, because then it's too late for her to go anywhere. And he started laughing. So that was sort of a very good example. That and one more little quick one. These 4 women stopped they were probably in their 40s, and they got out of the car and they all had their nickels in their hands. Whenever I saw that, I knew someone was coming on purpose. They weren't just driving by.
What did they have in their hand?
Their nickels.
Oh.
So they were coming
That's not
on
what
purpose.
I heard. That's not what I heard.
They were coming on purpose. So they get out of the car and they're laughing hysterically. I mean, they're just, and I'm like, this is great. This is exactly what I want this to be. So we have this great conversation and we talk about stuff, and they go to leave and they're like, thank you very much. And they get halfway across the street. One of them turns around and says, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we stopped. And I looked at her and I said, you got out of the car laughing hysterically. All I had to do was not screw it up. I mean, there were, like I said, there are cold people from the environment that are already somewhat inclined to have that attitude. And you get to have great conversations with a particular segment of the population that is open. They're ready to sort of think about stuff and have a conversation. And that was the real advantage of that project. But here again, like I had no idea that's what it would turn into. I mean, I figured maybe 20 people would stop and it would be fun and it'd be a nice diversion. But you don't know where things are going to go until you pull out your glue and your crayons and start making something. You just can't tell.
What are your daily practices? What's your typical day look like?
This is, recently discovered that one of the ideas that I've had for a really long time is actually true. I get up around 3:30 in the morning. And because I have this idea that the world's really quiet then and you can think, you can really get into your own head because it just feels like the world's quiet. And I work on projects. And then around sunrise, I go out and onto the beach and I have my cup of coffee. And, and then I come back and I make stuff and watch old movies and listen to old radio shows. And then I go to bed. Now, I'm doing that because of our present situation, right? But if you had asked me 7 months ago, what could you do if you had the opportunity to do anything, I would have said exactly that. I would have said, I'd love to spend a couple months getting up really early and working on things and, just have the time to really get into what I was doing. But the way I got it ruined it, because this isn't the way your dreams should come true. You really can't steal a Christmas tree, which is this idea I've had forever. I mean, it is literally impossible to steal a Christmas tree, because if you think you can steal a Christmas tree, then you don't understand the meaning of Christmas. And you can steal a tree and bring it home and put lights and presents under it, but that's not what makes it a Christmas tree. The meaning of Christmas makes it a Christmas tree. So the moment you steal it, it ceases being a Christmas tree. You can't steal a Christmas tree. And that's the way I feel now. Like the way I got what I always kind of wanted to have for a couple months, I got in a way in which kind of ruined it. It shouldn't be this way.
If you weren't an artist, I guess if you didn't get the shit kicked out of you, what do you think you'd be doing?
I don't
imagine what that would look like.
I don't think anyone would have ever heard of me. I would have worked in my garden and lived in that house. And, I built that house. I designed and built it myself with my own two hands. It took me 8 years. And I was happy doing that. It wasn't that I was unhappy doing that and I needed to find something else, which I think is important. I really don't know. I probably, that's what I would have done. I would have done that until, I was no longer around.
I just want to encourage people, if you have some questions, we can get to those in a few minutes. I'm just looking at the chat box now. So send us a couple questions if you have questions for Matt. I don't want to go negative, Matt, but I remember back when I was doing the film, you were getting letters from the town about. So Matt has since moved, but he used to live like right on kind of a main road to the beach, and he put a lot of his artwork and his advice booth kind of right out on the street, and it was great. I mean, people loved it, people talked about it, but I think there was also people that probably complained about it because it's a dangerous corner. And I know you used to get some complaints and some letters from the town. I assume that that's all ceased since you moved.
I wouldn't say ceased.
What are the town policies? Maybe you don't have to go into this if you don't want to. What are the town policies for putting your work in town, in flower boxes and on the sidewalk? Is there restrictions?
Well,
Is it kind of loose?
if there is, I don't know. I'm sorry, but that's what I do. So it's not going to go away. Um, boy, I never really kind of understood that, but I think that might be another indication of the picture that I was living in. And it's a picture of a way a place is supposed to be. And anything that deviates from the picture, I think sometimes people feel threatened by that. When the picture in their head doesn't match what someone else is doing.
That's interesting. Yeah.
They feel threatened. And which is another thing that, I love chocolate ice cream. I really love chocolate ice cream. I walk into an ice cream store and there's 4,000 flavors. I get chocolate ice cream. It's what I love. But it doesn't mean I hate vanilla. And I think I got that idea from some of that conflict is, just because you love something doesn't mean you hate what someone else is doing. You're just doing what's making you happy. I think people have a tendency sometimes to feel threatened by things that are different or don't fit into that picture they have in their head, and when that happens, it can cause problems. But that's kind of what I'm doing. Now, I do 3 projects. I do a window box project. I go out in the middle of the night. I make a bunch of similar things, and I stick them in the window boxes. And up until recently, the idea was if you liked it, take it home. But the idea was it appeared. One day it wasn't there, and the next day it was there. Then I do another project where I make things and I stick them in the bushes. And if you drive around and you pay attention, you'll see weird things in the bushes. Up until recently, I did a project in the wintertime that I moved around the island. Every 2 weeks, it would be out in Sconset, then it would be in Nantucket until it disappeared, which it would eventually do. But the idea the art isn't a destination. So if it disappears, it disappears. I'll just make something else because the art is getting people to sort of pay attention to their surroundings. And then I do the wishing wheel projects, which are all audience participation, which means you got to think, oh, I want to make a wish. Which means you're paying attention. You're paying attention to an opportunity, which is another way of getting, helping people to pay attention. I just think when people pay attention, the world's a better place because you're not really telling them what to pay attention to. They have to figure that out for themselves. Just pay attention, see what's going on around you. And I just think everything is better that way. It's, people think of my work as individual projects, but they're not. It's all part of one project. It's all part of the same idea in different forms.
I'm going to look at a couple questions here.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, right?
Have some coffee.
Not a lot. I guess we've answered most of them. Anyone else want to throw a question up there? That'd be great. There's a couple of comments. It says, this guy is amazing. He's a genius. I love hanging out with him. But let's actually keep it about Matt and not about me for now. How to get that in, right? Have you ever met anyone that was like you? Any soulmates or instant brothers from another mother? That's from Jeff.
I grew up with some kids where I grew up that I tell you, I don't know if through circumstance, it was very fortunate. They were most of my friends growing up were very overpowering personalities. So I was sort of always in the background, but I really sort of appreciated, their willingness to do things. I to this day think that had a really, being, in the formidable years, being around some really smart people who they love to do things. I mean, I had some friends that they'd go to Newark Airport, and for $28, you could fly to Boston, Washington, D.C., or Philadelphia. And they'd cut school, and they would fly to Boston, and they would get a cab driver to buy them beer. I mean, we're all like 14. And I hope my parents have passed, but the rest of my family, I did it a couple times. I went to the 14th Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., and you lay on the bridge and the planes fly right over that bridge and your whole body shakes. And I just spent the day with me and 3 other guys, drinking beers. And their willingness to do things like that, I had a very profound effect on me. Of course, you're a kid, you don't know that till years later, and you find yourself jumping on a plane to Japan, and you're like, without a second thought, because why not?
Gotcha. I wanted to share a funny story. You were talking about not having TV or a lot of technology around. I asked, I guess I can tell people that you're a Zoom virgin. This is Matt's first Zoom phone call or video call.
On a Zoom.
But when I reached out to Matt a couple of weeks ago, I said, "Hey, I want to interview you on Zoom," and he kind of looks at me sideways and he's like, "You want to interview me on the 1970s kids show called Zoom?" Like that was it.
Yeah, well, that's not the funny story. The funny story is someone forgot to leave their phone number on the note on my door, and I didn't have your phone number. So my first thought isn't, I'll just Google it. I got out a physical phone book and tried to look you up, and you weren't in the phone book. So then I was like, I'll go to NCTV. They'll have his phone number. But of course, they're closed now. I think I just have this attitude, like, I don't know. There's something, anything can be an adventure if you make it into one. It's particularly easy when I knew at the end of the road I would get your phone number. It wasn't like there's a chance I won't find it. So instead of just Googling it, I was like, well, how can I do this? Who can I call? What can I do? This could be kind of fun. So I spent a day looking for your phone number, which was actually a little adventure. I mean, it was,
Maybe I did that on purpose.
Every time you walk out your door, it's an adventure. You can plan your day to death. I don't care.
It was crazy.
It ain't gonna happen.
I left you 3 different notes, one on the car, one on the door, and you're right. And not one of the notes was there a way to get in touch with me. Yeah.
But anything can be fun. I mean, particularly when it's not going to hurt you and it's not going to hurt anybody else. When the opportunity comes along to have a little mini adventure, take it. I jump on it. Like, see where it goes.
Yeah. Got a couple more questions coming in. From Regina, what was the best take it or leave it find?
Oh, jeez. Oh, there's been a couple. I have a sort of love of old vacuum cleaners, like the real old ones, the electrolytes that had the metal skids on them, or the ones from the 70s that looked like discs, flying saucers that sort of slid on the ground. I mean, I gotta tell you, like, that day when I walked out in the basement, I probably had one of the best vacuum cleaner collections that you're going to find on the East Coast. I had a physical representation of every vacuum cleaner for the last 70 years. I had at least one. There's something about, I have a deep love of Victrolas. I love Victrolas. There's something about them that I find magical. It's a magical thing to wind it up, and you have to replace the needle every time and put the record on and you listen to it.
That's actually how our film starts together. It's absolutely beautiful.
The technology is very simplistic. It is designed to be fixed. They make it so when it breaks, which it will, you can fix it. There's this weird, speaking of vacuum cleaners, there's this weird moment in the 70s, the late 70s, where vacuum cleaners went from exposed screws that you could physically see to no way to get them apart. Because when I make things, I take all the heavy parts out, so I don't have to worry about having them stand up with a lot of weight in them. So there's this moment where, like, they went from, sure, fix your, Electrolux vacuum cleaner to buy another vacuum cleaner if this one breaks. And there's this physical line that you can see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's across the board with all objects at some point. Cars, where suddenly they realized there was more money in selling you a new one, or the fact that company was the only one that could actually fix it for you. That special tool.
I'm fortunately old enough to remember, and just remember, and particularly because my parents fixed everything, everyone in my neighborhood fixed everything. But the old idea, the original idea was recycling. Like in the 30s, people recycled everything. You brought your beer bottles back to the bar and they refilled them. Or a Hank Williams song, I got my bucket's got a hole in it, I can't buy no beer. That was because you use the same bucket to get beer every day. You know, throwing things away is the new idea, and recycling is the old idea. And for some reason, that has gotten switched. People think recycling is the new idea, and it isn't. It's the old idea. It's what people originally did. They didn't throw anything away. You know, I never understood that. I don't know. I think that's very odd.
Another question from Jeff. What is your favorite color?
Air Sea Rescue Yellow.
What is it?
Air Sea Rescue Yellow. My yellow.
Okay.
My yellow, baby. My yellow. Yellow.
Now, do you sell these shirts that you make, or are those one of a kind?
They're one of a kind, but here's another. You know, so I'd get a big shirt from the Take It or Leave It when I painted, but because I wanted to paint right away, I never cleaned my brushes. I froze them because I use a high VOC oil-based paint, and it never freezes. So you can put them in the freezer, pull them out of the freezer, and start painting right away. But the problem is they're frozen, so you have to loosen up the bristles. So I get an old shirt from the dump, and I would loosen the bristles on the shirt. And when it got filled up, then I would throw it away and get another shirt. One day, this guy shows up at my house, and he looks at me and he goes, "I'll give you $50 for that shirt." And I was like, "That'll buy me a can of paint. Here you go." Like, and so after that, I started to save them and wear them around. Then people started saying to me, you know, "That's a nice shirt, but there's nothing on the back." And it's because you can't rub the bristles on your back. You know, so the backs are always still just a white shirt. So then I started thinking, well, I got to come up with something to write on the back of the shirt. And that's where a lot of the you know, you can't steal a Christmas tree. That's where that comes from. Looking for something to put on a shirt and trying to come up with a good idea.
Right. Is there one on the shirt you're wearing now? Is there something on the back?
When you don't have to be something, you can be anything.
Can I see? That's great. Super cool.
I love it. I like that one. That's the another one.
I think I'm looking for questions. It's again, I think we've answered them all.
Well, I have a question.
Uh-oh.
I have a question, and I've had this question for.
I should have thrown that out to you. Yes. What is your
literally starting this project, and I've talked about the idea of pictures, and one of the few things I didn't try was taking pictures. You had to have the equipment, and I didn't really have money at that time. But what is a picture? What is a picture? I mean, how would you define a picture that you take with a camera?
Wait, so are you throwing this out to the world, or is this?
No, you, buddy, you're on the hook now. Let's go,
man. I thought you were going to ask me what is recreational.
All right, well, you know, there's another one. No one. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And I don't smoke pot. Like, I got nothing against people who smoke pot. You smoke pot, that's fine. It's just not for me. I mean, I don't do that. But on the radio, they kept talking about recreational marijuana, and they kept saying it. But no one ever. I waited and waited for someone to say recreational marijuana and then define it. What is recreational marijuana? No one has ever defined it. Like, no, on all the reports I've been hearing for the last 2 years on the radio, no one has actually said, and that's the fact that question doesn't get asked. It just, it sticks in my brain. It's like, why isn't no one asking that question? You know, it's not for me to define it one way or the other, but it should be part of the discussion. And it was never being had.
To answer your question, I'm going to oversimplify it, but it's capturing a moment. Does that answer the question you're asking about?
Yes. Yeah. And
I don't know if it needs to be defined beyond that. It's just capturing what's in front of you at that moment.
You know, I've kind of gone from pulling a moment from the blur, and so people can focus their attention on that one moment. You know, like that's what I've sort of kind of come up with. but I'm not satisfied with that definition. I still haven't figured that out. I still need to, all these papers or all these, when I get an idea, I write it down. What is a picture? It's right here. I write them down, and then while I'm working, I look and read them over and over and over again, trying to understand, because I don't necessarily always know where my ideas come from. Like something gets in your head, and I think if you read them over and over again, particularly out loud, the answer will pop into your head, like, because you know the answer. Most people are intelligent enough to know what they're thinking. It's just sometimes you don't let yourself know, for whatever reason. But you should never be afraid to ask a question. I used to tell the people on the advice table, and you should never be afraid to ask yourself a question either. You should be able to sit down and say, why am I doing this? Is this a good idea? The tools that I use, if you go to hang a picture on the wall and you're going to nail a nail in with a screwdriver and you smack your finger, you don't blame the screwdriver, right? You got to use your tools correctly, and then there'll be a benefit to you, but if you do that, you need to sit down and say, okay, well, now why did I do that? Why didn't I just go get a hammer? And that's how you kind of figure things out. At least that's how I figure things out.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, we're at the top of the hour. I just want to say thank you. It's always an incredible pleasure to catch up with you. I always enjoy our conversations. Is there anywhere off-island people can see your work? You're on Instagram, is that right? Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I've started to get requests that involve shipping, and I'm still sort of kind of working that out. I'm the product of a community-based arts program, so I kind of tend to think of my art as for the community in which I live. Mm-hmm. If somebody wants something and they're willing to pay the shipping, I would be go ahead. I recently sent a tip jar to Hilton Head Island to the Mellow Mushroom. How that happened, I have no idea, but whatever. I bet there's going to be a lot of stuff like that. I love tip jars. Tip jars are the best. Yeah. I wanted to mention that, but we are running out of time. I think that's just such a great idea that whenever there's a band on Nantucket, sitting in front of that band is a tip jar that you made. It's just I love that. I mean, I don't think you're doing it for a marketing ploy, but man, is that a smart idea? Well, it's an opportunity for people to put up something. Like there's no art parks here, so my dream is to work in an art park where there's a piece of property and you can put up whatever you want. But we really don't kind of have that here. I mean, what I do doesn't necessarily fit into the Nantucket thing. So, but I don't let that stop me. Look in the bushes. I'm telling you, when you're driving around, look in the bushes. All right. Well, thanks again, Matt. I'll put Matt's Instagram. It's no such place 3693, but that'll be in the credits as well. So if you want to follow him, it's a great follow. You get to see his new work, and he'll, his writings. It's all in there. It's just really, really good stuff. That's my digital footprint. What's that? That's my digital footprint. Yeah. Right. All right. Thank you very much, Matt. Yep. See you around town. Thanks for being open and honest with all your answers. It's been a great. Party like a rock star. Great. It's been a great hour. Thanks. All right. Well, take care. Yep. Bye-bye. Well, that wraps up episode 1. That was a good one. I may just have to stop right there. Just keep it at 1. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. A huge thank you to my partners over at NCTV. Definitely couldn't do this without you. They do an incredible job of producing shows, also getting great content out to the island. And be sure and join me right here next week when my guest will be artist Gabriela Loba. Gabriela lives and creates in Nosara, Costa Rica. She's beautiful, she's talented, and she's a fascinating woman. You definitely don't want to miss that. So tune in next week, same time, same place. Thank you all. Have a great night and support your local artists. Take care.